Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to this next virtual live session. So my name is Shelby Marcy. If you've been here before, you've met me, but I am the vice president of the Spelman College Glee Club this year. Our special guest today is Angelica Trumer. She's going to be speaking to us about financial literacy. I'm going to quickly read her bio and let you know some logistics about how the Zoom call is going to go, and then we'll get started. Angelica Trumer is an Atlanta-based certified financial planner and financial coach. She is a proud alumna of Spelman College class of 2009 and Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. Angelica is the founder and owner of Nicole Limited Co., a boutique coaching firm that focuses on financial education and consulting for the whole self. She is also a portfolio manager associate at Bank of America Private Bank, specializing trust and private client investment management. Angelica is a member and ambassador of the Atlanta Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce and has intentionally built her planning and consulting practice around the importance of financial education and being inclusive of marginalized communities and those with unique planning needs. Outside of her work, Angelica lets her hair down as an instructor at Secret Garden Pole Fitness Boutique, a company member of Gawin Mata West African Drum, Dance, and Vocal Ensemble, and a member of Light and Tight Women's Flag Football Team. But before she begins with her beautiful PowerPoint, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or if we can manage it nicely, you can unmute yourself and you can ask your question, and then Angelica can respond that way. Otherwise, just put it in the chat and we will definitely get to it. But I hope you guys enjoy and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shelby, for that introduction. So first off, I just want to start off by saying how awesome it is to be able to come back to the Spelman community and speak amongst family, especially about a topic that I feel is so important, especially in these unprecedented times, for sure. So you heard a little bit about me in that introduction, so I don't really need to go on about me, but just kind of like the highlights about my experience, or that I've studied many aspects of the industry so that I can be of better service to my communities and to my clients. And outside of my role as a portfolio manager associate, in my personal business, I'm committed to serving the underserved, including women, people of color, and queer communities. So today we'll cover a number of financial topics. So the goal of this is not to leave here feeling like you're an expert at everything, because as it relates to the world of money, we could hold a year's worth of workshops to even attempt to cover all of it. So the objective today is just to touch on the foundations that will be the fundamental building blocks to having a solid financial plan. So this may be new to some of you all, and it may be a refresher for others. So we'll basically explore the attitudes and feelings that you all have about money, gain some fundamental tools to be more organized with your personal finance. We want to walk away with a better understanding of what's involved in a comprehensive financial plan, and then beginning to understand how to incorporate those aspects to balance them in a financial plan. So if we'll go to the next slide, the first question that we'll ask is, why should we even care about financial foundations? I mean, if you are making it from day to day, then why do we even care? So if we'll go to the next slide, I just want to share just a few stats. I'm not going to, read too much about it, but just kind of giving a little bit of background about the state of finances for African Americans. So, according to a 2018 study that Mass Mutual did, some 84% of Black families believe that the American dream means financial security. 78% in not living paycheck to paycheck, and 77% in owning a home. So those are some pretty large numbers. And it seems like African Americans in general are kind of on the same page about what it means to be financially secure. If we move to the next page, the numbers look a little bit different. So outside of retirement accounts, only 37% of African Americans own wealth building products such as stocks and mutual funds. Only 35% believe that they're doing a good job of preparing for retirement, which says a whole lot. And then on the next page, we'll see that 33% have less than 1 month of funds saved for a crisis, and less than 25% have more than 6 months of emergency savings. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but emergency savings, kind of the guideline, especially, in these times, is about 6 months worth of savings. So to see that less than 25% of African Americans have more than 6 months of emergency savings is a little alarming. But while we see that Black people have a longer runway ahead of us to try to narrow the gap that's caused by centuries of systematic setbacks, we're actively involved in educating the next generation how to live comfortably and build wealth. So that's the last statistic that says 58% of African Americans are actively involved in educating their children on finances versus 48% of Caucasians. So that's a good sign that in the years ahead that we are improving our financial situation as a whole. So it's just a little bit of background about kind of why I do what I do and why we even need to talk about financial literacy and talk about why this is important for us. And so what we want to do now is just equip you all with the tools that you need to do that. So on the next page, we'll talk about the very, very first building block, which is budgeting. So we're going to get back to basics. Like I said, a lot of this will be new for some of you all. It might be a refresher for some, but budgeting is, again, one of the most fundamental tools that you have to access in order to properly plan and manage your cash flow. So I suggest that you follow a zero-based budget. And essentially what that means is that every dollar that comes in has a job. So if you are bringing in $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000 per month, each dollar should be allocated to a line item, whether it's one of your basic living expenses, savings, investing, your fund money, anything. And it's also important that you allocate the appropriate dollar amounts to each category as well, so you can ensure that you pay a good amount of attention to both living comfortably today and to living comfortably in the future. So a 20-60-20 guideline is a good place to start. And that 20%, that first 20% you'll see is going toward discretionary expenses. Now, discretionary expenses could be everything from entertainment, clothing, personal care. These are all the things that I would say would contribute to your mental well-being, those things that we do for ourselves to enjoy life, and they contribute to your lifestyle. Essential expenses, that 60%, those are the things that you need to survive. So the expenses that are going to go toward your housing, toward food, any loan debt. So whether that's auto loans, student loans, personal loans, insurance, car insurance, life insurance, health insurance, all of those things are essential expenses. So allocate about 60% of your income toward that. And then the last 20% will go toward saving and investing. You all may have heard the old guideline that says to put aside 10% of your income towards saving and investing. And just kind of as time has gone by, we're discovering that with the changes in our sources of income, that guideline is looking a little bit more like 20%. compared to our parents and grandparents' 10%, because they had access to pensions where we don't have access to that anymore. So we need to put aside a little bit more for our future selves than our parents did for that reason. And so with the 20-60-20 guideline, it's not something that you absolutely have to have set in stone. You can vary off of that. This is just a good place to start. But one thing that I would definitely suggest is that for the discretionary expenses and the essential expenses, you try to max those out at 20 and 60%. It's always a good idea if you deviate from that to go a little bit under for those and then over for savings and investing, then to go over for your expenses, and then that cuts down on what you can save and invest. So now on the next page, you'll likely hear about a variety of savings vehicles for both your emergency funds and for your goal funding. So a lot of people will ask me what type of accounts they should put their savings into. And before I go on, I want to also reiterate that the general guideline for savings is about 6 months worth of expenses. And that's not just housing expenses, because some people will say, oh, 6 months worth of rent or 6 months worth of your mortgage. 6 months worth of all your expenses is the guideline, because in an emergency situation, which a lot of people are in now during this pandemic, the last thing that you want is to have to make a choice between essential expenses. So what kind of account should you save in? The three main things to check off when you're considering the type of account for emergency expenses is, if I have an emergency today or tomorrow, can I access my money quickly and easily? Number two, ideally, I can leave my emergency fund alone, but if I have to touch it now, will I avoid paying any early withdrawal penalties? And then the last thing is, if I put my money in and access it at any time, am I certain I can withdraw the same amount of money that I put in without it losing value? And if the account that you have your savings in checks off all those boxes, then that's a good choice. So traditional savings accounts and money market bank accounts, which are the first two on this list, are typically going to meet all those criteria for easy access, no penalties, and no risk for losing value. Certificates of deposit or CDs are not usually a good idea for emergency savings, because early withdrawals will have you paying some penalties for that. So CDs are good for safety of principal. So if you want to make sure that you don't lose money, that's a good idea. So if you're going to leave something for, for certain for a year, for 5 years, or, whatever that period of time is, CDs are good for that. But for emergency funds, when you don't know exactly when or if you're going to need to access it, it's best to stay away from CDs for that. So now on the next screen, let's say you are building your emergency savings and you have a good solid 6 months. Now you're interested in putting some of your money away for a while and just letting it grow. So the question is, where should you put it? This is a list of just some of the types of investment vehicles. There are so many to choose from. So this by no means is an exhaustive list, but I want to stress here that these investments are for long-term investing. So if you're gonna need to access your money in a few years, then it's probably best that you avoid long-term investment vehicles and stick to some of the investment vehicles that aren't going to put your money at risk or aren't going to lose money. So generally speaking, I don't know if any of you all are working or getting ready to enter the workforce, or if you've been working for a while. I'm not sure of our audience here, but you may have a retirement plan like a 401k, a 403b, 457, TSP. They can go by a whole lot of names. But generally what that is, it's good to have, because you can usually put money away into these accounts tax deferred, which means that whatever amount you put in there is going to be deducted from your taxable income. So it looks like you earned less money for tax purposes. And then oftentimes your employer will also match what you put in up to a certain dollar amount. So you're getting free money. And so you can also have retirement accounts outside of your employer plan in an individual retirement account or a Roth IRA. And so both IRAs and 401ks will have contribution limits every year, which might change over time. So, every year you'll just check the IRS guidelines to see what the contribution limits are for that. But the benefits of retirement accounts are that you're going to get some sort of tax benefit, whether you get a tax benefit today because it's tax deferred, or you're going to get a tax benefit later in retirement, as is the case with your Roth 401k and your Roth IRAs. Now, 529 accounts are college savings plans, and so the funds are specifically to be used for qualified education expenses, which would be, your tuition, room and board, books, all of those things. And so contributing to those types of accounts, you can usually get some kind of tax benefit by contributing to that as well. And that's the benefit of putting it into there. However, you'll get a penalty if you use it for anything other than qualified education expenses. Mutual funds, those are a common investment vehicle. You'll see them in 401ks, you'll see them in brokerage accounts. It's basically a way for you to get a share of the market, whether it's stock market or bond markets, without directly investing in a company. So if you're interested in investing, mutual funds and ETFs are a good idea because it allows you to kind of diversify without putting all your eggs in one basket. Bonds and stocks are probably some of the ones that you most commonly heard of. The differences between those is just with stocks, you basically have a share in ownership of the company. And as the value of the company goes up and it goes down, you'll also see your share in ownership increase or decrease in value. With bonds, the difference there is that the company is now indebted to you. So you are essentially loaning the company a certain amount of money. So let's say you loan them $1,000, you buy a $1,000 bond, which means that you've now given this company $1,000 to use for their operational expenses or whatever it is that they need. And so their promise to you, or what makes that attractive to you as an investor, is that after a stated period of time, whether it's 6 months, a year, 10 years, you'll get that $1,000 back. But along the way, every 6 months, you're also getting a stated amount of interest. So it's not going to have as much of a potential for gains as a stock would, but you do get some kind of return on that. And bonds are generally safer than stocks in that sense. So next, I want to transition from your budgeting, savings, and investing into debt management. Debt is one of those things that is a way of life for Americans. Credit card companies, loan companies basically start coming after you as soon as you turn 18. And so it's very easy to get into debt, and sometimes it can be overwhelming and seem a little daunting to get out of it. So these are just some tips for managing your debt appropriately as you go. So let's say that you have your income coming in, you have your emergency fund, you've paid your expenses, you've also put some money aside in savings, but you also feel like you have some extra money and you want to try to pay down some debt with that extra cash. So the priority, because there is an order that you want to prioritize those extra debt payments. And I do want to make sure I specify that these are extra debt payments. Still pay your minimum debt payments on all of these. But if you have extra, start with the high interest credit cards first. So if you've got 19, 20, 20 something percent interest credit cards. And you also have some that are lower interest, maybe about 12, 13%. Start with those high interest credit cards because you're going to start knocking down those balances a lot sooner, and it's going to save you money and interest over time. Now, once you've paid off the high interest credit card debt, then you want to focus on non-deductible debt. And what I mean by non-deductible debt is debt that is probably not going to have any type of tax benefit to you when you go to file your taxes. So non-deductible debt includes personal loans, it includes car loans. You're not going to be able to deduct any of that interest when it comes to your taxes. So those are going to be the ones that you focus on next. And then last, prioritize your deductible debt. And so I have an asterisk here to consult with your tax advisor regarding the applicability of your individual circumstances. And I say that because in some cases, depending on your individual situation, you may or may not be able to deduct debt, interest on student loan debt or interest on mortgage debt. So when it comes to, filing taxes, that's something that whoever is your tax advisor, you want to make sure that you give them all of the details about your specific situation, so that you're, number one, taking advantage of all of the deductions that you qualify for, and also just making sure that you're not overlooking anything. So now I want to go a little bit more in detail about student loans, because those of you who are currently in school, you may have some student loans that you don't know what you're going to do with after you graduate. I mean, of course, we got to pay them back, but there's so many ins and outs about loans, and it's good to know the details of the types of loans that you have, because then that will be helpful in you paying them back. So you want to know whether you have federal loans, private loans, or a combination of both. Now, the next screen is just going to show a comparison between federal loans and private loans. These details, we'll try to make sure that we share with you. I don't want to read down the list, but there are some differences, like for federal loans, you don't have to make any payments while you're in school, whereas private loans, you might have to start payments even while you're in school. There may be some loan forgiveness options for federal loans, whereas with private loans, you may have limited or no options for forgiveness, cancellation, or discharge of those loans, and you might be stuck with those loans regardless of your situation. So with all of your federal loans and your private loans, you want to make sure that you know which one you have, so that when you are customizing your repayment plan, you know what kind of options you have with each one. Now, if we'll go to the next page, we'll talk about repayment options. You may be able to change your repayment plan in certain circumstances. You just want to know what the characteristics are of each of these repayment plans before you do that. So the default is going to be a standard repayment plan. And so with the standard repayment plan, you'll have fixed payments for no more than about 10 years. Standard repayment plans will tend to have the highest monthly payment amongst all of the repayment plans, because it's repaid over a shorter time period, but it ultimately over the longer term will save you money because you'll pay the least amount of interest on that. Now, with a graduated repayment plan, the payment period is the same as the standard, but it allows you to start with a lower payment and then increase the payment as you go toward the end of the term. And so one would use this type of repayment plan in a case where, let's say you are just entering the workforce and you have an entry-level position that has the potential for pretty significant increases in income as you continue working. So you may want to do a graduated repayment plan to start your payments lower, but knowing that you're able to pay a little bit more toward the end of your term. Now, an extended repayment plan will allow you to extend that repayment period for up to about 25 years. And the payments can be fixed or they can be graduated, like the standard and graduated repayment plan. But the payments are going to generally be lower than either the standard or the graduated plan because it's an extended term. So the longer you extend the payments out, the smaller your payments are going to be. The income-driven plan, which is one that a lot of people are most familiar with, is going to automatically set your payment at 10%, 10 or 15% of your monthly discretionary income, and then it's going to extend your payment period to 20 years. Now, for those, you're going to need to every now and then reapply or reaffirm your income with your loan provider so that they're keeping track of how much money you're making over time. Now, for loan forgiveness, depending on what industry you go into, you may have loan forgiveness options available to you. Two of those would be the public service loan forgiveness program that will apply to a lot of people who are in hospitals, nonprofits, and the specifics of that term or the specifics of the program can vary by provider, but generally, if you apply, go ahead and continue making the payments as agreed over the span of about 10 years. Then after that 10 years, if you made your payments in a satisfactory fashion, then they'll go ahead and forgive the rest of your loans. And the teacher loan forgiveness program is similar to that, where if you go ahead and pay your loans over a particular period of time, then they'll be forgiven after that. So now on the next slide, continuing with repayment options, if you don't qualify for any of those forgiveness programs, let's say later on down the line, you decide that you have 8 different federal student loans and they each have different interest rates and they each have different payments, and you just kind of want to get everything together, and then based on your repayment history, you feel like you can qualify for a lower interest rate. So then you might do some federal loan consolidation where they'll take all of your federal loans and basically combine your principal balance into one principal balance with one interest rate. And then with that, a lot of times with consolidation, you can have a lower interest rate than the average of the interest rates that you would have had before. You can do a similar situation with private loan refinancing. If you have a satisfactory payment history, you can go to a private loan service provider and refinance your loans. With that, you'll have a one principal balance, you may have a new term, and then you'll have a new interest rate. And so the benefit of that is usually that it'll lower your interest rate overall. Now with deferment and forbearance are a couple of options that you can take to postpone payments. And so with deferment is usually going to be better than forbearance because if you have federal student loans or Perkins loans and you're unemployed or dealing with financial hardship, then you can usually take advantage of a deferment. And the length is going to vary. So you may be able to defer for a year. If you're going into a graduate program, you may be able to defer those loans until you're done with your graduate program. So there's a little bit more flexibility with deferring your student loans. Now with forbearance, you can still do forbearance. Let's say you don't qualify for deferment and you're having a financial hardship and it's temporary. So with a forbearance, a lot of times it will usually be for no more than 12 months at a time. And that's going to be the maximum for most of your loans. Now on our next screen, I want to talk a little bit about credit in general. So there are lots of different factors that go into your credit score, and the whole credit system can be kind of confusing sometimes just because you have scores that come from Equifax and TransUnion, and you have the FICO score. And it's hard sometimes to determine what is going into that. And so all factors, you want to remember, they don't necessarily have the same weight. So you want to take a look at your individual situation and be sure you know how they're affecting your credit score. So these are the five factors that go into it. You have payment history, amount of debt, credit age and history, your account mix, and then credit inquiries. So the one that by and large is going to have the most impact is your payment history. And so once payments are, 30 days late, 60, 90 days late, those companies that you owe money are going to be reporting to credit companies about once every 30 days. And so that's going to account for about 35% of your credit score. The amount of debt that you have is going to account for about 30%. So you want to keep your debt to income ratio as low as possible, especially if you are considering applying for more credit. So whether that's an auto loan or it's a mortgage and you're contemplating buying a house, they tend to look at your debt to income ratio quite a bit. So keeping the balance on your credit cards lower. You'll hear this 30% or 10% mark on credit cards as kind of like the standard to keep your accounts below that. Generally, if you keep amongst all of your credit cards, you keep the total balance below 30% or of your overall available credit. That's usually what they'll go by. But if you can keep that bar low for each of your credit cards, that will also help. Now for credit age and history, obviously, when people don't have any credit at all or they have a very limited credit history, that's going to impact their credit negatively, but it only factors in as about 15% of your credit score. With account mix, companies like to see that you have a variety of credit, whether that be revolving credit, so that's your credit cards, consumer loans, so that's your auto loans, mortgages, student loans. If you have a good mix of all of those, then that's going to look better than if you had nothing but credit cards. And then lastly, credit inquiries. So every time you apply for new credit, in many cases, it's going to be a hard inquiry on your credit report. So if you are applying for credit in 10 different places within a short period of time, that's not going to look good. Whereas if you are only applying for credit once every so often, then that appears better, but that doesn't factor in as much. It's only about 10% of your credit score. Now, I do want to make sure that I point out that you want to keep a watchful eye over your credit report and your credit score, because sometimes there are errors. There may be negative items that maybe they're in error, or it might be justified, but you want to make sure that you are doing an in-depth check of your credit report at least once a year. If you sign up for things like Mint, Credit Karma, sometimes your banks will have a free credit reporting. You can take advantage of that to keep an eye on your credit score on a regular basis, but pull your credit report to get an in-depth look at least once a year. Now on the next screen, I want to talk about financial planning as a whole, and ways that you can make your money work for you. So spending is going to be a part of your everyday life. We already talked about savings, and then we also talked about growing your money in investments and retirement. But two other parts of financial security are giving and protecting. So giving is something that's not necessarily important to everybody, but sometimes giving is something that you actually plan for in your financial plan, whether it be giving to your religious institution in the form of like tithing or donations, giving to community-based organizations, donating money, donating time. And these are ways that you can give back and contribute to your community, but also it can sometimes serve as a tax benefit. So giving isn't just for, it's a feel-good activity, but it can also benefit your financial plan as a whole. And then protecting and safeguarding your assets is something that is absolutely the foundation that you want to make sure that you have. So having your emergency fund in case of, being out of work for 6 months, in case of, something significant that will take you out of work, or short-term disability or short-term injury or illness. Disability insurance, super important because you are your biggest asset. So if you can't go to work and earn money, your financial plan falls apart. So making sure that you have insurance to protect that. Life insurance, making sure that your loved ones are able to continue living the lifestyle that you would want them to live, leaving a legacy, building generational wealth. Life insurance helps with all of that. And then as well as your other insurances like health insurance and auto insurance. Those things are pretty self-explanatory, just making sure that you protect your vehicles in the event of, an accident or, liability, and also protecting your health and making sure that you're able to get the medical care that you need. Now I want to go over one more slide before I open it up for questions. But in general, I just want to kind of talk about this concept that you may have heard where you'll hear people say that you want to run your household like a business. So when you think about successful businesses, whether they be larger businesses or small businesses, they have lots of different moving parts and different departments, and they each have their own functions and their own responsibilities and their own jobs. And so when they're successful, they function well on their own as a business unit, but they also come together to effectively and efficiently support the mission and vision of the enterprise as a whole. So what I mean by that is, you see Facebook and you see Facebook operate in, the way that we use it in our daily lives. But behind Facebook, there's so many different layers, and each of those layers need to run effectively in order to help Facebook run. So this is the same with your household. Your household is an enterprise and you are the CEO. And what I mean by that is that in a financial sense, your home enterprise is responsible for all of these different things. And so I've listed, some of the responsibilities that a department or a team may have within the scope of a business. And in parentheses, that's what it looks like in a personal sense. For example, bookkeeping and accounting, super important for a business, but what that looks like for you is budgeting and cash flow management. So some of those fundamental things that we talked about. We've also got taxes. We can't avoid taxes. So that just goes across the board for whether it's a business or your household. Then also, I want to point out, becoming owner, just an owner versus an owner operator. So as you open a business, a lot of people will want to find ways to help the business run so that they don't have to be a part of it. That's essentially what you're doing when you're saving for retirement. You are earning this money now and you're putting money aside now so that you don't have to work later, and so that you can continue running your household business without having to be there to work and make it run. And then as far as succession planning goes, when business owners are ready to sell their business, or they want to make plans for when they pass away and they want to maybe pass it down to a younger business partner, or they want to pass it down to a family member. On the personal side, that's your legacy and your estate planning, making sure that you have wills in place, making sure that you have life insurance, making sure that you have end of life plans so that when you are no longer here, that you can have your wishes carried out the way that you want them to. So overall, there's lots of different moving puzzle pieces, but once you put them all together and you have a solid foundation, you can have a really solid, effective, well-oiled machine in your financial plan. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. I don't know if anybody has put anything in the chat, but I am open however you guys want to do it. Okay, I think I see Ariel.
Hi, my name is Ariel Alvarado. I am a junior music major, choral conducting concentration, Jesus, and co-student conductor and co-librarian for the Glee Club. I just want to say thank you for this talk. You know, this is really important that we talk about just as college students, because particularly for us juniors, like we're about to have to get into this loan repayment and all that kind of real stuff real soon. So I appreciate you coming to talk to us. But I have two questions, unfortunately. Okay. My first question is, for about, I guess, 6 months now, I've been wanting to, I guess, have an EFT or a mutual fund that is centered around and focuses on young Black entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And just us pooling our money together so that we can buy up stocks, do whatever we see fit, and you know, whatever we put into the company, whatever we put into it is what we get out of it. But just so a way that we have more buying power as emerging adults, if you will. Mm-hmm. So my question is, if you were to do something along those lines, how would you shape it with your financial knowledge?
So that's a good question, because especially in these times, there are lots of different opportunities that are coming up. So if you have a dedicated group of people that you want to pool money in together and, you know, invest in different, you know, mutual funds, ETFs, stocks, whatever, you know, the possibilities are endless. So one thing that you all can do so that it is, so that you have it set up and recorded properly for, you know, for legal purposes and for tax purposes, is organize it as some sort of business. And there's lots of different, you know, business structures. So, you know, you have your LLCs, you've got your general partnerships, limited partnerships. So those types of businesses that are, you know, focused on investing, a lot of times will be formed as limited partnerships, where you'll have, you know, like one person who's a general partner who will be responsible for, you know, kind of picking and choosing the investments, and the limited partners are, you know, providing the investments. And so by setting it up as a business, you have the legal documentation for, you know, everybody's share of ownership in that, so that when it comes to, you know, gains and, you know, dividend payouts and income that the business structure gets, then you have it properly recorded, and then also you can have proper documentation for tax purposes. So doing something like that is one way to do that. Because, I mean, you know, lots of people are, you know, pooling money in together by, you know, just maybe giving it to their homegirl and say, homegirl, you know, do this, but just to, number one, protect everybody that's involved. You want to make sure that you go through the steps to put the safeguards in place that you need to do that kind of thing.
Sure. And then my second question is, in addition to all of that, I've been looking at, I've been wanting to for a very long time start my own investment portfolio, mm-hmm. but my parents have a financial planner, and they want to get me in contact with him, but that was right before all of this started. And so now it's a lot harder to get on his schedule. And I see not everybody, I see a large population of people who are opening their own brokerage accounts. And I'm like, well, I have $50 that I can put into my own brokerage account and then go give the financial planner whatever else for later. But what program what company would you suggest for opening a smaller brokerage account?
So I can't really recommend a specific company, but I will say that there are definitely a number of companies out there that will do that. So some of the common ones that you'll see, Acorns, Stash, Digit, all of those, where they, they'll take a little bit of money from you at a time and then invest those into things like ETFs. Wealthfront is another one. Betterment is another that I would say I have personal experience with. And so all of these are digital platforms, which is sometimes why it's so easy to do these things. So the digital platforms, anything that has an app, will usually make it a lot easier for you to do that. Robinhood is another one where you can invest directly into companies on their platform. And as far as like which one is better than the other, I mean, honestly, they all are about the same, just in their capabilities, because with each platform, you tend to have the ability to invest in the same types of investments. So, a certain group of platforms will allow you to invest in ETFs, and a certain group of platforms will allow you to invest in stocks directly. So the main difference is really going to be in, any account minimums that you have. Fees, definitely be aware of fees that each of these platforms have. Like if they have any trading costs, sales charges. I mean, and all investments are gonna have some sort of fee associated with it. But you wanna keep your fee as low as you can for, you wanna keep it reasonable, because otherwise it starts eating into your investment.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other questions? I was going to say, I think everybody else is not on camera. No. Okay. Well, I mean, if you all have any other questions for me, if we go to the next slide, this is my information and how you all can get in contact with me. If you have any other questions, or if you want to set up a one-on-one, I'm definitely open for one-on-one talks as well. But I want to say thank you to all of you for joining me. This has definitely been my pleasure to come talk to my sisters. And thank you to Spelman Glee Club for having me. And I don't know if you all have anything else that you want to add before we...
Yeah, so I'll close this out. So thank you so much for speaking to us about all this information. I'll be sure to pull this back up so I can take a couple more detailed notes. But this was
a lot of info. I know.
It was a lot, but it's okay. It was fantastic information, and I'm sure everyone took something from it. But yes, thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. I hope you learned something, or something was refreshed in your mind.